We'll take judiciary first. As you're probably aware with some of my legislation, I'm in Dutch with the judiciary. I don't want to raise the ire of the judiciary anymore. No, I'm just joking. I would wanted to get the, I'm sure you do. I wanted to go back to the agenda items as they are, but just want to let those who are in the audience on those two issues, we will take you up in a little bit, but we have to take care of a couple of items on the agenda first. So with that, we will go to the judiciary. I know Chief Justice Weimer is here. Okay, Becky, you ready? And Chief Justice, as soon as we give the presentation, you'll be welcome to make your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Well, wait, I'm sorry, after the presentation.
Oh, I am sorry.
You'll have as much time as you need. Okay, Becky, please proceed.
Good morning, Rebecca Robinson, House Fiscal Division. I'm here to present the FY24 budget for the judiciary. This morning, I will give an overview of the various courts in the judicial branch, their historical spending and expenditures, and how courts are funded. On page 3, you can see that the Louisiana Constitution distributes the governmental powers among 3 separate branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial. The judicial branch is charged with interpretation and application of laws. This branch is comprised of the Supreme Court, 5 courts of appeal, 43 district courts, and other local city parish courts. There are a total of approximately 368 judges that preside across the state. This slide shows our 7 Supreme Court justices. Just an overview of the Supreme Court. This is Louisiana's highest court, and they're domiciled in New Orleans. In addition to hearing cases, the Supreme Court establishes procedural and administrative rules for Louisiana courts, regulates the legal profession, promulgates and updates the Code of Judicial Conduct. The map to the left illustrates how the 7 districts are currently portioned. Judicial terms on the Supreme Court are for 10 years. And then also we have some indicators on this table on this chart illustrating the number of files, appeals, writs, and dispositions for the Supreme Court. The courts of appeal, there are 5 courts of appeal, and the districts are illustrated on the map. They are the intermediate courts between the district court and the Supreme Court, and judicial terms are 10 years here. The district courts, there are 43 judicial districts throughout the state, and it's illustrated on the map here. Each district contains at least 1 parish, has at least 1 judge, and elects a chief judge. Judicial terms at the district court level are for 6 years. A portion of this district court budget is appropriated through HB 104, and we will go over that in a little more detail at another slide. Another type of court within the district court level are drug and specialty courts. There are 71 Louisiana specialty courts, 47 of which are drug courts. The other specialty courts are reentry courts, veterans treatment courts, family preservation and treatment courts, co-occurring behavioral health courts, and sobriety DWI courts. Each court specialty program is comprised of a team which is led by the judge, includes a coordinator, treatment staff, the prosecutor, the public defender's office, law enforcement representatives, case managers. And on this table, you can see just some stats on the drug court participants in 2022. This slide illustrates some successes within the drug and specialty court programs. And overall, the recidivism rate for these participants is 6%. Juvenile courts are also within the district court level, and these have exclusive jurisdiction over delinquency cases involving persons under 17 years of age, with the exception of felony offenses for which 15 to 16-year-olds can be bound over to district courts. Juvenile courts also handle the adoption proceedings of children under the age of 17, and this table illustrates some of the activity of the juvenile courts within 2022. This slide illustrates the historical spending of the judiciary over a 10-year period, and the average 10-year spending rate change is 2.5%. The sources of funding for the judiciary, which is in House Bill 104, the executive budget recommends state general fund of $178.8 million, interagency transfers of $9.4 million. $5.4 million of those dollars are for drug and specialty court programs, and almost $4 million is for CASA, the court-appointed special advocates. Statutory dedications at $10.2 million, $6.2 million is coming out of the Judges Supplemental Compensation Fund, and $4 million out of the Case Management Information System Fund. Funding comparison, you can see FY23 EOB compared to the executive funding recommendation. This is a 2.4% increase in state general fund over EOB, a $4.3 million increase. $1.9 million of that increase is your 2.5 annual increase in salaries for the judges. That was passed in the 2019 regular session. $2.3 million is requested to expand the drug and specialty court programs, CASA, and families in need of services. How the courts are funded. HB 104 fully funds the operations of the Supreme Court, the courts of appeal. It also funds the salaries and benefits of the district court judges, 27 judges of Orleans criminal and civil district courts, salaries and benefits of 2 court reporters in the 20th JDC, and the salaries of 17 juvenile and family court judges. There are items found in the bill that are only partially funded. Office and travel expenses reimbursement for judges, expenses of the clerk of court for the Orleans Civil District Court, salaries of the commissioners of the 19th and 15th JDC, some office expenses for the 19th, 15th, and 10th JDCs, and some salaries for clerks, court reporters, commissioners, and other things that are illustrated on this slide. And then not funded are all sorts of local courts. So your city, your traffic, your parish, those are not included in the HB 104. Those are funded through local revenues. This slide illustrates judicial financial reporting. In April of 2022, Louisiana Supreme Court adopted Part G, the General Administrative Rule regarding revenue and expense reporting. This rule requires all courts to collect and report revenue and expenditure data, and they report that data yearly to the Supreme Court, which then publishes a report that it shares on its website. So you can see the first table discusses the revenue. So the city courts, you can see the majority of that is local sources, court fees, costs, bond fees, miscellaneous revenue, civil filing fees. When you get to the district courts, you do have 42%, which is state funds, which are for judge salaries, and then the remainder is derived from local sources of, again, court fees, fines, court costs, that sort of thing. The courts of appeal is funded almost 100% by the state judiciary appropriation. And then the bottom outlines the expenses for the different courts. And again, this is just a visual representation of how these courts are funded. That is all for our presentation. I have Chief Justice Weimer here for remarks. I also have Justice Piper Griffin and Chief Financial Officer Brian Wolf to answer any questions.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome Chief Justice Weimer and Justice Griffin. Thank you all for being here this morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I am joined, as indicated by Justice Piper Griffin, who serves parts of Jefferson Parish and Orleans. I asked her to join me because she has a wealth of experience with judicial budgets in her prior position as a district judge. She is the newest justice on the point of service, and together what we are here is to reflect what I refer to as service diversity. You have the oldest in point of service and the youngest in point of service, and diversity certainly is an important component of the judiciary. She's been an outstanding addition to the Supreme Court. Tradition holds that the newest justice holds the door for the other justices, but sometimes tradition must yield to good manners and proper etiquette. And so now I have gone back to doing what I did when I started at the Supreme Court, being the doorman and holding the door for her and others. I have a wife and 3 daughters at home. They have always told me who goes first, and I have learned that lesson, as I'm sure many of the gentlemen in this room have also. I appreciate very much the courtesies extended to the judiciary, and I made an effort last week to reach out to each and every one of you, either via text or email or telephone, and I did have a chance to speak to many of you. I enjoy the interactions with legislators when we work together, as we have in the past, in a spirit of goodwill to serve our citizens who expect us, of course, to work together. Like anyone in public service, I hate to ask for money, although I admit that I hate to be asked for money even more. But I know as public servants that happens to us all too frequently. As a judge, of course, I cannot ask for money in a campaign that is done by an independent committee. But last year, when I faced re-election, I decided and I announced publicly that I would not accept nor request any funds on behalf of my candidacy. Now, that ploy to be retired did not work out very well for me, though, unfortunately, and so I was rewarded with another 10-year term on the Supreme Court, and that's why I'm here today. Since 2001, when I was first elected, in the 12 parish district that I serve, no one has voted against me during that period of time. Even Representative Kerner, who voted against me twice when I first ran. But then he asked me to go swear him in as mayor, and I did so. That was used to transition, if you will, to our purpose today, of course. The funds invested with the judiciary the last few years have brought us back close to where we were years ago, and were in turn invested in drug and treatment court programs and specialty courts. And your staff member outlined all of those, but let me just point out that our drug and specialty courts continue to lead in the face of a terrible drug and addiction crisis that has unfortunately visited our state and much of the nation. And I know this crisis is being addressed also with a host of legislative bills that have been offered so far. Drug and specialty courts treat and teach personal responsibility, accountability, and favor rehabilitation over incarceration. And the graphic just showed to you indicates that there's only a 6% recidivism rate with people that go through the drug and treatment court programs, which is truly remarkable. These courts also reduce recidivism and save the state money in corrections, mental health, health care, while also saving souls and keeping families together. The Supreme Court as indicated, administers a number of courts, and in each of your districts, there is a drug court or a reentry court or a family preservation court, except Representative Bacala, because he asks too many damn questions when we come here. That's fine. Maybe you'll never get a drug and treatment court. I'm kidding, of course, Representative, because I know that they operate their own court in Ascension Parish outside of the drug and treatment court program, and they do a remarkable job with that. And, of course, certainly I'm jesting with my esteemed colleague. We'll talk later. The funds the legislature also provided were invested in the CASA program. Representative Desatel, I know your mom was a volunteer. Justice Griffin was also a CASA volunteer, which I refer to as extraordinary, ordinary citizens who serve among the most vulnerable in society, abused and neglected children who are there in court through no fault of their own and find themselves frightened, scared, and alone in court proceedings. Every member, even Representative Bacala, has a CASA program in their district. The funds were also invested in FINS, Families in Need of Services, to keep intact the family unit. I refer to what they primarily deal with is a rut, runaways, ungovernables, and those who are truant. Courts match families to services in order to keep intact family units, and that is so critically important in our society. These funds were invested in Louisiana Protective Order Registry, which aids those facing domestic violence, and I spoke at length with Representative Freeman, and I spoke at length with Representative Carpenter and Marcel about the tragedies that have visited Louisiana, and Representative Freeman and the legislature passed a bill for additional training for judges in this arena, and we have written back to you, and we're implementing that as we speak. This weekend, there was a judges conference, and there was a robust program on that just this past weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, the Louisiana Supreme Court is only one of a very few Supreme Courts in the nation that manages all four of these programs. And in most states, these programs are not in the judicial budget and are managed by agencies. So it's a little bit difficult to compare what we get with other states because we do so much more than other states. These funds were invested in courts to ensure technological advances, and we will continue to work to create uniform websites in all of the district courts. We also continue our partnership with local courts to expand remote hearings that benefit citizens and implementing solutions to aid the core functions of judging. Some creative solutions include online calendar platforms where you can go to the court's website and know what is going to be on the agenda. Text message reminders where citizens are notified via text that they have a court proceeding to try to reduce the number of people that are no-shows, and staggered appearance times in criminal and civic dockets to aid working people that have matters before the court rather than them coming all at once and lingering all day until their matter is called. We have made courts more user-friendly, open, accessible, and transparent in many areas, including language access, where Louisiana moved from one of the bottom rungs up to being among the states recognized as a leader and as an example of other states to emulate. Judges have also invested this past couple of years that which is most precious, our time, in going into courtrooms and classrooms and inviting students into their courtrooms. This is a conservative, I know that's a good word to use, a conservative estimate of over 11,000 students were visited by a judge, either in their courtroom or in the classrooms. And we teach civics, we teach personal responsibility, respect for the law, and for themselves and others, and the consequences of inappropriate behavior. With juvenile crime spiking in many areas, judges have been proactive in their communities, and our judges in the classrooms and students in the courtrooms initiative has attracted national attention recently when the president of the American Bar Association mentioned the program by name. And we have gotten the finest form of flattery. People are asking, how did we do it and what can they do? So imitation being the finest form of flattery. Because of the importance of what is referred to as the Judicial Structural Task Force, chaired by your chairman, I appointed myself to that task force, and along with judges and representatives, Representative Villio is a member, of course, and the National Center for State Courts has been engaged, and we are looking at how to best deploy judicial resources while, and this is important, continuing to reflect the rich diversity of our state. This very important work is ongoing, and the chair has taken, of course, a great interest in it. I'm also chairing and serving on this is the aforementioned Representative Bacala. The legislature some years ago had established what is referred to as ICEGIS, which is the Integrated Criminal Justice Information System. It is a board which involves data collection and dissemination between all stakeholders in the criminal justice system. And Representative Bacala, to his credit, and with my appreciation, used one of his precious 5 allotted bills to try to reform some matters related to ICEGIS. Louisiana, unfortunately, ranks very low in this important area of ensuring police and judges and DAs have real-time data for engaging those who are arrested or who have their bail set or who will be sentenced, and for background checks for people who work in certain areas. And also to expunge records for those with youthful indiscretions to get a fresh start and enter the workforce. This is a public safety issue of the highest order. It is funded outside of the judicial budget, but I can't help but mention its importance to the judiciary, and I'm sure Representative Bacala will have some questions on that momentarily. Our CFO, Brian Wolf, who is here, he is a CPA. He's been the budget director, holds 2 jobs, has graphics that I believe have been distributed already to each of you, which indicate our budget request is reasonable, necessary, and demonstrates frugality when evaluated on a historical context. I ask that our budget, our ask is that it is a budget which is reasonable for a branch of government which does so much for so many. While our programs save money and lives, ultimately the judiciary's primary function is to decide disputes among our citizens, to sow resolution, and to end disagreement and acrimony. Daily, our judges resolve issues that would challenge the wisdom of the biblical King Solomon, the great judge in the Bible. We average in the nature of 1.2 million filings a year annually throughout the judiciary, and judges have to evaluate each and every one of those. Judges resolve those disputes by applying the law in a specific case enacted by the legislature and without legislating from the bench. We respect the role of the legislature as the lawgiver and know that you respect our role in our system. We ask for adequate funding as requested to continue to provide and implement and improve the services our citizens so richly deserve. Justice Griffin will make some brief remarks, and then Brian Wolf will answer Representative Cruz all the difficult questions that you asked me some years ago that he answered for you when I could not.
And good morning, and I want to thank the chief for inviting me to be a part of this. As he said, this is my first time participating. And I have the unique perspective that, as the chief mentioned, all of the programming that the courts have done, as a person who served on a district court for for a little over 20 years, actually, I was involved in many of those programs and did, in fact, as a baby lawyer, serve as a CASA volunteer. But people have often asked me, what's the difference between what I did on the district court and what I do now in the Supreme Court? And I have much better appreciation for all of the hard work that the court does. In short, the court runs a huge agency, corporation, whatever you want to call it, but it's a huge operation. And not only do we employ a number of lawyers who have special areas of interest and help us disseminate the work that we do and accomplish what we do, we also employ accountants. We employ IT specialists, human resource specialists, and other specialists who help us do the best job that we can for our branch of government. And in looking at those people, they're professionally dedicated to the work that they do. But what I've seen as the newest justice on the court, having been there for 2.5 years, is that we have a hard time often keeping up with the rank and file as relates to being able to offer competitive salaries, being able to have retention because of the inability to give adequate raises or to acknowledge even just the hard work that they continue to do on behalf of the citizens here in this state. And so I think they're our biggest asset. And so as I think about the programs that we do, I think about the people who help us administer those programs and administer the work that we do. And so we struggle with staffing. And so as the chief talks about, being able to adequately fund our branch of government, I think of those people and the work that they do and how dedicated they are to the work that they do, but also to the shortfall that we because we are unable to give them the monies that we believe that they're so readily deserve and would probably and often do garner in the private sector. So we find ourselves from time to time having a brain drain of people who know what they need to do and simply aren't able to stay with us. I thank you for the opportunity to be here. Amid COVID, that's when I joined the court in 2021. And I saw us doing yeoman's tasks, being able to continue to administer the work that we do on our branch of government in a way that's both professional and we hope that also complements the other branches of government and the things that they do on their branches, and being able to adequately and successfully administer justice for the citizens of New Orleans. I think, and I spoke this past summer, I had an opportunity to speak with some of the women and the Women's Caucus. And during that caucus, one of the things that we talked about and that I spoke very passionately about is that the fact that we want the same. That as we talk about Louisiana, all of us want this, we have the same goal. And the same goal is that we want a Louisiana that is the best, that produces the best, and that works for everyone who lives here in this state and within our various communities. And I think that that's true for every judge that sits on every bench in this state, and I know it's true for the justices that I serve with. As the chief said, I'm the baby of the group, so I'm still learning. And I hope that if there's anything that you have questions for me, I hope I'm able to adequately respond to those questions in a way that at least lets you know that though I'm still learning, I'm able to answer some of those questions and be able to address certain issues.
And let me just remind you all, there's Chief Justice that have contempt authority throughout the state. And if anybody asks a question she can't answer, I get to pick the jail. I would like to turn over to Brian Wolf. Brian has been working 2 jobs for too long, but he is not only our budget director, but also our CFO. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about the graph that is before you.
Good morning. Brian Wolf, CFO, Supreme Court. I'm going to try to make 5 points in about 3 minutes because I know y'all are busy. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the graph that you have in front of you. We go through a pretty lengthy budget process, 2.5 months. When we get to the end of it, the numbers are rolled up, and the last exercise I do is I do something like this graph to make sure that our request is reasonable. If you look at the judicial state general fund budget back in fiscal 16, it's about $156 million. I take that number and I increase it year by year, one by the Division of Administration inflation indexes that are allowed in a budget, and I also increase it by the CPI indexes. And if you would take that $156 million back from 8 years ago, it would equate to a state general fund budget of about $191,500,000 by Division of Administration escalations, and about $207 million if you look at it from CPI escalations. And then I compare that to what we're asking for, which is about $190 million. So that proves to me that the exercise that I went through, it's about $1 million less than the Division of Administration escalations and about $17 million less than CPI escalations if you compare it back to what would have happened with the 2016 budget moving forward. The current posture of the bill, we're at $178 million. So about $12 million less than what we asked for, and considerably less than both the Division of Administration and CPI indexes. Some of the components of the budget that is not funded at this time is retirement escalations that we're projecting for next year, which is about $2.9 million more than what's been currently recommended in this budget. $1.8 million for health care increases. Both of these are mandated. We will have to spend those. And the third piece is something a little bit different that we've never spoke about before, which relates to CMIS, the Court Management Information System. I think you've heard that the information system tracks and manages civil and criminal, appellate, and protective order cases and various information of public safety. CMIS has been historically funded from fines, fees, and court costs due to decreased criminal traffic violations and convictions. Those fines and fees and costs are down. And because of that, the Supreme Court has been backfilling the deficit. If you look at CMIS's revenue from 2015, it was $2.1 million. Right now, it's running about $1.1 million. So it's about $1 million decrease. CMIS ran about a $650,000 deficit last year, was backfilled by the Supreme Court's budget. If you look back to 2013, when Act 403 and 404 was instituted, CMIS became responsible for FBI National Instant Criminal Background Check System. At that time, the Supreme Court submitted a fiscal note of $0 because CMIS had revenue back then. Since fines and fees and court costs are not covering these costs, included in the bill that was presented was a request for $1.5 million more in state general funds as opposed to statutory dedicated funds to backfill both the deficit and to increase about 4 or 5 positions that CMIS is down. So I ask, as you analyze this bill, that you consider adding more money to the judicial bill specifically for CMIS and to help solve the deficit they're running and backfill some of these positions. The last piece is just the staff increase. The request was for $4.4 million for a staff increase, which was an 8% increase. I think inflation is starting to drop some, and I would think a more appropriate number at this time might be half of that, would be $2.2 million, which would be a staff increase. That's all I have at this time, and I'm willing to ask questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Chief Justice and Justice Griffin, for coming this morning. Just a couple questions and I fully appreciate the request and the comparison to previous budgets, but Brian and also Chief Justice, we typically with continuation budgets, we'd love to be able to pay for and compensate for inflation, but unfortunately we can't always do that across the board. So just kind of put that in perspective. The request that y'all are asking for, so the budget as it stands now, it's 4 million more than what was from previous year's budget.
Correct.
And what you're saying, which is not included, or the difference, I guess, is from what you're requesting to what's in there is about $11 million in terms of difference in what you'd like to get if we funded the whole request. The mandated costs, 2.9 and 1.8, so those are mandated costs for retirement systems or salary increases or what?
No, just retirement
Just
system and
retirement system.
healthcare.
So about
payable to laser.
4.7 for lasers and.
Yeah.
And as the committee knows, we just get a factor from lasers that we have to apply to our budget.
Right.
I have tried to figure out how they come up with that factor without a whole lot of success, but in part it's related to putting money back into the system within a period of time so that the system becomes stable again.
Right, and.
And y'all know that
Right,
better
and
than
we're
I am
working to
sure.
Address that as well. All the specialty courts are fully funded, though, right, in the existing budget as it is?
They are.
They are, okay.
And the dilemma there, though, unfortunately, is that we are obligated to pay the lasers bill. We're obligated to pay OGB. So each year we're left robbing Peter to pay Paul. And certainly that's a dilemma that we're trying to avoid.
I get it. The staff increase requested, there was funding in last year's budget for an increase for staff as well, wasn't there?
There was,
Was.
4%.
Okay. The fund balance, obviously y'all have to pay, or you reference the fact that you have to pay some unfunded issues, and you do that, I assume, with the fund balance, judiciary fund balance. What is the current balance of that fund?
The Supreme Court's reserve or fund balance is $38 million. It's
38
dropped
million.
from $54 million about 7 years ago. And that's because in the past 3 years, the AFR has supported that the judiciary, the Supreme Court specifically, lost about $8 million 3 years ago, $3 million 2 years ago, and $3 million this past year. And
But
that's
part
what-
of that was related to a reduction in salary from previous administration's funding for the judiciary? Part of it?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's.
which
when-
we've made a commitment and continue to work toward addressing
Yeah,
that.
but the problem is that expenditures keep increasing.
I
mean,
know.
you're trying to hit a moving target. So the money that was replaced the past 2 years, which was phenomenal, is
And much
replacing-
appreciated.
is replacing some of the money that was eliminated, and of course, taking care of the mandated expenses that continue to happen year after year.
And in 2018, we left the Capitol building with a $40 million deficit. And obviously, some of that was replaced following a special session. One of the many special sessions that y'all had to endure in a part-time job that in which y'all work full-time, particularly early in y'all career, to get finances straight. And I commend you for all of that hard work. But, we could have spent our entire savings, which took us 30-some-odd years to save, at, I think, about 1% per year. Could have been gone in an instant,
But we worked through that.
we didn't do that.
They
Came
worked through
close.
that. Yeah, they worked through that.
We worked through that.
Okay. So ideally, an additional 4.7 just to address the mandated cost would be necessary just to cover what the judiciary needs for.
Right,
Ladies'
without
retirement
going,
and others.
we tried, we're trying to fund the programs because they save money in other areas. They benefit the citizens, they benefit the state fisc. But if we don't have, enough funds to fund them, we obviously have to fund our mandatory items on the budget first to keep the lights on.
But those other funds are for the specialty courts though, right? Aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
which
we want to fund both.
Okay.
Obviously. And CASA and fins and
But that's factored into the budget, is it not?
currently.
Okay. Okay, we have a couple questions. Let's see, Representative Marcel for a question.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Justice Weimer, for contacting me personally and going over some of your budget requests and just some of the things about the judiciary, period. And certainly thank Justice Piper for being here with you. I appreciate the work that you all are doing. I do have a couple of questions, though. So as I looked at the slides, it appears, and I think the chairman may have touched on it, that you're going from 174 million to 178. And I heard your CFO say that he now doesn't need the 4 million. So are we to reduce 2 million from that? Or is that from a different pot of money?
It's from a different pot of money.
A different pot?
Right.
So you still need the 178?
Right. What was funded before in that $4.3 million was $2 million for judge raises. It was $900 for drug courts. It was $900,000 for CASA, $870,000 for drug courts, and $545,000 for fins.
Okay, and so that
So
is a
that's-
different pot?
Yes.
Okay, that brings me to my next question. I passed some legislation on last year creating the domestic violence court in 19 JDC. So in your budget, are there any additional dollars for the additional courts that we've created in 19 JDC? Is that in there at all? In other words, staff, additional judges?
We have a staff member regarding drug courts and other courts such as the specialty courts that can possibly answer that question.
And it's
Okay,
my appreciation that most of that is funded by the court, the 19 JDC itself, that there has not been a request from the 19 JDC for the Judicial Council to add that to the Supreme Court budget. But again, the staff member would better be able to address whether or not that is in fact accurate.
Okay, and since we're on the subject of 19 JDC, your budget am I correct in stating that 19 JDC has the largest population now of all the district courts? Am I correct in making that assumption?
Demographically, I don't know the answer to the question, but I have heard some people, for fact, but I have heard other people say the same.
Okay, having said that, does the budget reflect additional dollars to the shift? So if there was a shift and now 19 JDC has more cases and more population than other areas, is there a shift in your budget or are there additional dollars? So they would have to request those dollars? Is that accurate? 19 JDC would have to request them?
Yeah, excuse me, this is Joanna Bro, who is a judicial administrator with the court, and she manages the drug and treatment court programs, and she can possibly.
Well, I'm just talking about the courts overall now in 19 JDC, so not just the specialty courts. However,
The Supreme Court is only responsible for paying through the state budget the salary of the district judges. Other expenses are the responsibility of the locals. That's been a big problem that we have faced, and we're trying to extricate ourselves. I know Representative McGee spent a lot of time studying those issues. Now, relative to a drug and treatment court program,
what's the domestic violence court that,
I've been working with them on that. We have not funded it or received a funding
can
request.
you come a little closer? 'Cause-
I've been working with them on that. We have not funded it or received a funding request from the 19th JDC as of yet, but we've been working with them to get them enrolled in our case management system and invited them to various trainings that we offer so that we can get them into the fold. I don't know what the status is on their funding. I thought they had a federal grant to initially fund that, but we are not currently funding that program.
let me just say, Representative, I was involved in creating what ended up being the second drug and treatment court program in our state. And back then, there were no funds. This was not a thing. It later became a thing that the legislature, in its wisdom, got involved in and began funding. We had to hustle grants. We had to hustle federal funds. And generally speaking, in the past, many of these courts had to get up and running on their own. Now, we have a better system now, and so generally it's a process where the judges decide they want to have a drug and treatment court program in that jurisdiction, and they contact Joanna's crew, and they begin working on the process of. But there are so many, because we are funded by federal federal dollars. There is a myriad of hoops we have to jump through, not only to set them up, but to continue funding them, because a large portion of this is funded through TANF funds.
Right.
And you know how difficult it is
Yes, sir.
anytime you're dealing with federal funds.
And you made a statement earlier about saving souls and keeping families together is a part of the mission
Sure.
of yours and of course the courts,
Absolutely.
and that's what we should all be about. So I'm as we go down that road of saving families, keeping people together and restoring people, and the recidivism rate seems to be low when you have these types of courts, then I would wonder why we would not at least request, or you wouldn't request additional dollars to increase those programs and to perhaps help, and maybe I don't understand the funding and how it's done, but to increase helping and saving families and keeping families together, increase those types of courts like veterans courts, domestic violence courts. If that recidivism rate is what we're looking to do to lower people returning into the system, I would think that we would put more dollars in that. And so I guess I'm asking, where in your budget is there any increase for those types of programs, or is there a possibility that you could make that request?
I love that you asked that.
You do?
I
Oh,
do.
Great.
I do, because I would love to spend a lot more money on these programs. We try to make our budget request reasonable every year. We try to keep growth, but keep it in line with what the judiciary budget is asking for, and keep it in line with what is reasonable. Yeah, I would love to ask for $3 million every year. We can't always ask for that because we want to have a reasonable budget ask, and there are a lot of other things that, for example, the court mandates that come into play, and we don't want to come in, I don't think.
Well, I
asking for $40
understand
million
what
extra.
the court's purpose, right? But I also understand if we're going to change the trajectory that we were on in Louisiana, we have to do things differently. And so when we have seen success in programs, I just was wondering why we wouldn't put more money towards duplicating those. And having said that, I guess my final comment would be, I guess I'm confused as to why, if 19th JDC, and I do live in Baton Rouge, so I may be a little biased, but if they had more caseloads, why wouldn't your budget reflect them getting more funds? And that's my only issue with that.
And my appreciation is that on our specialty courts, most of our budgetary asks are based on the number of participants. And so, it is a formula. I learned this as I looked at the New Orleans Drug Court and some of the other drug courts. So to the extent that Baton Rouge has a participant population that necessitates more funding, what I would suggest to you is that it's there. To the extent that there is not as much participation, then it is not included in what has been suggested by Johanna as being our ask for this year. And what we do realize as relates to the district court level, and I can speak only to Orleans versus Baton Rouge to that extent, some of the courts within the state, as you saw the slides that came up, many of the courts are self-funding. and don't receive a whole lot of funds from the Supreme Court directly. They receive most of their funding from their filing fees, Baton Rouge being one and Orleans being another. And so, at least Orleans Civil District Court. And so the reality becomes that the Supreme Court only funds those additional programming such as specialty courts, where there is a granting source process through either CMS or other entities within the court system that allows for us to be able to send dollars down. And so it's not based on the population in any particular
And the
parish.
caseload. It's
And
not-
the caseload within the
Okay.
parish. It's not based on that.
Okay.
That is something, and if every court had this, and that's that last slide that talked about how much it costs to actually fund the judiciary, $308 million. That number attempts to capture how much each court within the state actually costs to run as it sits now. And so within that number would be a Baton Rouge number because they're the 19 JDC and they're in that district court column. And, so to the answer your question, it's generally not based on the number of filings. As a general rule, it's based upon how that court is funded, whether that court is funded via fees or filings, or whether that court is funded in some other way. And sometimes the local parishes and or governance sources provide additional funding, which is also attempt to be captured at least on that $308 million.
Yeah,
Representative,
I'm going to wrap up because I know some others want to ask some questions, but I did hear him say that the fees and fines were down, and so that was a $600 and some odd $1,000 deficit. And what do you all attribute that to? People are being better.
I think fines and fees are down for a number of reasons. One is that sheriffs are not writing as many tickets as they did at one time, and it's all about funding. The district attorneys have created a rather
Or
robust
people aren't speeding as much?
diversion. Well,
think?
I don't know that.
I don't know, I'm just
When I
asking.
drive on the highway, I think they are, but that's just me because I drive slow.
Well, we can check with Bacala. Get a good
But we're
answer.
working to try to get to him. He's next.
But
We're working there.
a lot of the fines and fees have fallen for a lot of different reasons, primarily with the diversion programs. And
All right.
but why don't you and Joanna get together and she can explain the entire process and where y'all are in the process.
That'd be nice, because I would like to know how we're going to fund the domestic violence court. As you know, there's been a rise in domestic violence cases, and I certainly want to do everything within my power, not just create the legislation, to make sure that the funds are there to open that court and to help the citizens and keeping those souls, saving souls and keeping families together. I'm going to remember that.
Well,
Thank you very much.
well, one thing, we have seen also is that there are fewer people that want to participate in drug and treatment court programs because it is difficult and it's challenging. They come out better on the other end, but it's a struggle. And some people have literally said, I'd rather go visit a place where they have 3 hots and a cot than work this hard to get clean and sober. And that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Marcel. Representative Bacala for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You touched on something that is a budgetary issue, or will be, I think, and that is the IC. You said it's not good. I think the correct, go a little beyond that, we're rated number 47th in the country in criminal records, correct?
You are correct, sir.
And I think the most telling point about how bad we are is only 18% of felony criminal convictions show up on somebody's criminal record, correct?
You are correct, sir. And
Which means if I have one felony conviction, there's an 82% chance that I can go into a gun store and pass a background check because the 82% of convictions are not recorded, right?
I believe the statistic as to guns, from what I understand, Because if you just have one conviction,
Right. I said just one. Now, if you have two, you got a 40% chance of being on there or something, 36%.
right, I think it's about I think the statistic is about there's a 50% chance that someone walks in to get a gun, will
With
get the
felony
gun
convictions.
with felony convictions. And let me just point out, we just started, I'm designated as the chair of this, and we have gotten very busy all of a sudden, and with your help, trying to address these concerns. And unfortunately, as technology has developed, the DAs and the sheriffs and everybody else can't communicate as well as we need them to do.
That's where I'm going to next.
And we don't have, now, this is outside, please understand, this is outside the judicial budget. But it is important to the judiciary. It's important to all the stakeholders. I was a district judge. When I got a criminal record to decide whether or not what someone's bail should be or how they should be sentenced, I defy anybody to sort through what we were handed and figure out what the hell was going on. And we need to improve that, and we're working towards doing it, and you're absolutely right. You're on the committee.
And let's just say someone's arrested for burglary, and they were arrested for burglary 3 years ago. We don't know if they're on bail, if they've been found not guilty, or if they've been found guilty, because the records are in shambles. And I will say that the records, it's not the court records, it's the arresting agency, it's the courts, it's the clerk of court, it is the whole gamut of the criminal justice system, correct? And we've been doing this for years, we haven't addressed it.
But there's a new chairman.
I knew what?
There's a new chairman.
Well, who's the new chairman?
Me.
Yeah. Okay.
And we've been meeting regularly, and God bless you came to the meeting.
I want to get on the budget side. First of all, we need to clarify who's responsible for what. That's with legislation, and then you need money to actually fix it once and for all. Correct?
You talking about I see just now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what we need there's all these stakeholders, and again, this is, as I point out, outside the judicial budget, but it impacts the judiciary, and so that's why I've taken a great interest in this committee also, and we had
Give me a
number.
number. What does it take to fix it, dollar-wise? One-time expenditure.
Let me bring Russell Cartoza to the table, if I may, who is here, because I knew you would ask that question.
Thank you.
I tried to anticipate my friends' questions and answer them with people.
Well, I'm trying to bring it to budget. I mean, I think if we
Yeah,
have a problem that we know exists, we know it's urgent, we know we need.
Right.
Guessing so that it may take 2 or 3 years. Russell,
Russell is
we can
head
talk
of,
about the problem, but how much does it cost to fix it?
is of the, of CMIS with the court. He's brand new. He is retired as a captain in the military. He has a degree in IT and a law degree. He is eminently qualified to talk to this problem.
Representative Bakla, we did look into projected expenses to correct this problem. Again, this is not specifically a Supreme Court problem. It's a whole criminal justice problem of about 200 separate agencies. And we came up with an initial estimate of about $15 million to make several significant improvements. We do have an RFP published right now for a consultant that has done this kind of work for several different states, and we're hoping that they will give us more concrete ideas, best practices, so that they can present them to the ICJ's policy board, and then the board itself can decide what direction we want to go on.
Okay, so how much, what's the number?
Our initial projection was about $15 million.
One-time expense? Non-recurring, how much would be a recurring?
I do not remember what the what our estimate was, but there is going to always be recurring annual support costs for whatever software we install, whatever licenses these agencies will need. Typically, with my conversations with IT professionals, they tell me 20% of what you pay for is going to be an annual recurring cost.
Okay. So 15 million, fix the problem, 2 million a year to maintain it. I'm just throwing numbers out here.
About 3 million would be about
3
20%.
million, okay. All right, that's.
A math genius, too.
Yeah, and Justice Weimer, scale of 1 to 10, how important do you think this is?
About 11, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. And because what it does, it touches on everything. When you go to set bail for someone, you need to have this immediately, real time. When you go to sentence someone, you need to have this information. When someone has made some youthful indiscretions, and they, there's this clean slate initiative, which I support in concept. The problem has been figuring out how to fund it. This would help in that respect also, so that someone, God forbid, your grandchild, niece, nephew, cousin, had a criminal issue early in their career. We're a country that believes in second chances and redemption. We can have these records expunged so that they can get jobs. I had a young man that was a former student of mine. He had some drug problems. I was a teacher at the time. I called Cheney Joseph, my former teacher, who was executive counsel for the governor, about this young man. And Cheney says, I keep putting it on the top of the governor's stack because he recognized how eminently worthy this young man was of getting a pardon. And now he has, he just got a doctorate, and he has the highest clearance that you can get with the federal government doing magnificent work. And yet, if he hadn't have gotten that pardon, he would have never been able to achieve the success he's achieved in life.
Obviously, it's an important system, but let's focus on the budget a little bit.
That is budget.
Okay,
I thought.
well,
It's a different budget.
it's a program within the budget.
Okay, I'll be done with that question. I will mention that I've often been critical of the New Orleans and their lack of prosecution. They have really apparently turned that around. I want to make it public. Last year we called out they had 4 criminal jury trials. Your latest report says they had 68, so it looks like some real differences are there. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Justice Griffin has been talking to everybody, and you were heard loud and clear last year, my friend.
Thank you, Representative Buckle.
And he really is my friend. We're not kidding about that. Half of my wife's family lives in his district. That makes people friends real quick around here.
Assuming they voted for you. That's, okay, Representative.
Unlike Representative Kern over there, who admitted he didn't vote for me twice.
Representative McFarland for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These may be more for Brian.
Yes.
So, 2-3 years ago, the Judiciary came in. Your funding had been reduced over the last, really, since 2009, 2010. And I believe we put 14 million to bring you all the way back to where you should have been at that time. Is that correct?
So I go back to 2015. At that point in time, we were reduced to about $8.4 million. And in the last 2 years, $20 million has been put back in the budget. But when you look at mandated expenses in the form of judge pay raises and also retirement and lasers, which is basically all has to be paid, our mandated expenses in that same time period have increased $1 million more than that increase.
Well, if you increase salaries, you're going to increase retirement and other expenditures.
You certainly are, yes, but that's.
I wouldn't say that too loud right now, anyhow. The other question I have, so in district courts, are we giving them any in this budget? Are we giving them any additional funding to address the increased number of drug cases that they're trying, or the increase of number of juvenile cases that they're having to try? You know, I represent a very rural area.
And I would answer that that depends on whether or not they have a drug and specialty court. And to the extent that their numbers are what they are, they get a certain dollar amount per participant in that program. However, to the extent that as I mentioned to Representative Marcel, the reality is it's not a per case funding system relative to each district court. It is, when we talk about the specialty courts, however, there is a mandated formula that we do, and it's based on the granting source. And the granting source says you get so much per participant. So to the extent that you're counting heads in those instances, yes. To the extent you're not counting heads, and we don't count heads as relates to general funding to courts otherwise, other than the specialty courts, I would tell you no.
Right. But if we're not spending money in district courts,
We are, but not.
but only
the
on specific ones.
Specific
So
programs.
we've had this argument in here for years now, but I will touch on it just for a second, that we are paying in some district courts, for additional expenses for clerks, court reporters, commissioners, law clerks, secretaries, but we're not doing it for every one of them.
Correct, because their funding sources are different. Every funding source is different based on mandates, sometimes statutorily mandated and sometimes
Well-
non-statutorily.
In all due
Let- let-
respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't agree, and I think it needs to be changed. The previous chairman, 4 years before Chairman Zarang, made this argument often, that it is disingenuous for us to sit here and ask all the taxpayers throughout the state to continue to pay for some and not contribute to all. So I represent a rural district, and it gets penalized because we're rural, so we don't have a lot of voters. But in a metropolitan area where you have a lot of voters, and they can put forth laws and have put them in statute that we're going to fund them, but we're not going to fund the rural courts. And what concerns me is, and this is what I'm asking, and I'm going to stop because I know we have a lengthy debate today, is at what point does the judiciary come in here and ask us to start assisting funding them if we're going to continue to fund all the others?
Representative, let me answer that question because it's something I've given a lot of thought to. And we should, in truth and in fact, fund all courts, all of the employees in the courts. It's a state judicial system. It's a state judicial system. But it has simply evolved into what it is. And Representative McGee, to his credit, spent a lot of time trying to figure out and unravel all of these knots. And we are now reporting, I'll acknowledge in the past there was some heel dragging, but when I became chief, I said we have to provide this information, and we do, and Representative Zarang put in the Judicial Appropriations Bill a requirement to do it. I didn't think he needed to do that because I was going to ensure that it happened, but he did. We have a better idea of how to fund the judiciary, but it's going to be, I think, a number around $40 million to get rid of the fines and fees and to fund all courts as they should be funded. And you're correct. We, as a judiciary, bringing forth the budget, have no wiggle room because there are statutes, as you just alluded to, that indicated that we have to put, we are told how we're going to spend a lot of this money. A large part of this money is spent based on statutory requirements. Orleans has, at one time it was the largest population center, and clerks, you're right, that they are funded differently than other parts of the state.
So are you saying that we can expect either, well, one, I guess it won't happen this fiscal session, but in the next 2 years, the judiciary will ask the legislature to have a more balanced approach as we fund court systems regardless of the population.
That is something that we have been talking about for a long time and not getting much support in the legislature for. I would love to do that and get rid of fines and fees, but, the financial resources or the will of the legislature just hasn't been there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McFarland. Representative Carpenter, oh, she's not here. Let's go to Representative Freeman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Chief Justice and Justice Griffin, for being here. Of course, I'm very interested in the specialty courts as well. It seems like Representative Marcel and Representative McFarland covered several of my questions. I like hearing that, was it 15 million that you said is, Ms. Bro, you said something about the amount that you requested that, no, I'm sorry, and I'm mixing up a number here because we were also talking about the coordination across systems, and that was the 15 million, sorry. What was there, your amount that you wish that you have for these courts? And is there any information to explain, like, what, and I've started thinking about, kind of as Rep. McFarland was asking questions, what is, we're not doing it per person, so how is it trackable? Because obviously it's trackable, because I can see and hear that you're taking the money and you're saying, okay, this is how many, how much money we save for drug-free babies, and there's specifics. So how are you tracking it, and what actually is in the budget right now, numbers-wise, and what would you prefer to have if you could?
I'm not sure exactly, Brian, what is the number exactly for specialty courts? I think it's about $15 or $16 million.
Okay, then I did hear that. Okay, all right.
So it's $15 or $16 million currently, and we do fund on basically a per slot. Everything's cost reimbursement, but we award budgets on their number of participants that they're able to serve within a year. That has gone down a little bit due to COVID and sort of the referral process slowing down, and we're trying to build that back up.
But if there is a way to increase the number of participants, is that being held back by, I'm hearing it's being held by you need more money, but I'm also sort of hearing that judges aren't running as many of these programs. So how can we as a legislature help encourage the introduction of these programs where they don't exist? Because I have spent time in the Orleans Parish criminal and civil reentry programs and watched and seen firsthand what's happening and how they're managed. But I would just love to know, how do you see budgetary what's needed and encouragement of other judges to do these programs?
We encourage judges all the time. One of the things that we did at the conference that the chief just spoke about, I had a expert on the neuroscience of addiction come in and explain addiction to all the judges in the state, which I think is the first time we've done that. So we're trying to expose those judges who don't have a specialty court in their district to sort of what we do and how we do it. The other thing, it takes really good treatment in the area. It takes an entire team that's willing to come together to provide those services. We help judicial districts bring that team together. Sometimes, for whatever reason, those teams don't coalesce, and we have to wait a little while before we can get it all together.
Well, and I guess ultimately I'd take it back to the budget. If you can't answer that today, I would love to know, like, what is the number that, we're here now, but if we could get here, we could service
This many more people.
this expansion of people.
I don't
Because
have that
ultimately, I've seen it work, I've watched it, and I know you already have a low recidivism rate. So to me, this is a no-brainer. Like, it should be in every parish, and it should be available to every particular person who could use these services.
Let me address this. In some jurisdictions, there is not everybody wants a drug and treatment court program for whatever reason. Judges do this for no additional pay.
I realize that.
And it ends up
Yeah.
being on their own time, and many of them do it because of the job satisfaction. They are helping people. They are making lives better. In other areas, other public officials say, we're just not interested. We're here to do something different, not to save souls. And so it takes special people to want to do these programs. And again, some of the participants, it's challenging to do it. It's what's best for them. But, I had time and again where I offered drug treatment court programs to people as a district judge, and they told me, I'd rather do the time.
Well, and again, taking it back to the budget, I would love to know, sort of more details on the breakdown of what's being spent now as to, and I know some of them, and you may have this breakdown, like some of them are getting federal grants, some of them are using fines and fees. So I don't fully understand. I'd love to understand the number side of it so that I could help in some way, shape, or form figure out how we can make it available as an option in some of these other places.
Is that something that I could contact you later about?
Absolutely,
That would be
absolutely.
great.
But that's what I wanted to make
I would
sure.
welcome the opportunity to meet with you. As a baby justice, I made it a point to understand the drug court, criminal court, and understand the other specialty courts. So I kind of have an appreciation for some of it. And so if you want to talk about it at any time, just let me know.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Freeman. Representative Cruz for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question concerning, what do you call it, CMAS? I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm trying to figure out, I want to understand a little bit better about how it's funded and why that funding's down. I'm just making sure I understand.
And let me give you the short summary, and then somebody more learned can dive into any details and answer questions that you would ask me that I won't know the answer to. CMAS is Court Management Information Systems, and what it's designed for is to track information so we can make logical, rational decisions on how to deploy judicial resources. What happened, it was funded by court costs, so it wasn't to be, and it's in our budget, but just as a placeholder. But what has happened is because fines and fees and costs have fallen drastically, and CMAS has taken on more work. For example, y'all took on the project that Russell alluded to about reporting to the FBI. Or Brian mentioned that. It has now just simply doesn't have enough funds to operate, and so we are funding the employee salaries out of the judicial budget.
So why are those court costs down and those fines and fees?
They're down for multiple reasons, and I mentioned that a moment ago. There are less traffic tickets being written. The district attorneys are using some of the funds. Or doing PTI programs, and so some of the court costs are just not.
So I guess that's the crux of my question is, if a lot of those functions aren't being used, why does the system cost more? The information is still needed. The information still must be gleaned from these programs. It's providing data for us to make decisions. So they're using other avenues to resolve them, but they still need to record the information through the system. That's what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
The data is still being produced. We just don't have the financial resources to keep it funded.
Okay.
Because court costs have fallen.
And ultimately, is this a interagency transfer to OTS, or is this completely self-contained? How does this system work?
OTS is.
The Office of Technology Services. Are y'all outside of that? You don't?
Yeah.
Okay. Last question is retirement funding. I heard one of my colleagues mention that. How is the retirement system work within the judiciary in terms of unfunded accrued liability and those type of components we talked about earlier? Is there any unfunded accrued liability there?
No.
Okay. And can you tell us roughly what, based on final average earnings, a judge or justice makes in retirement? So just to give us an idea how much this is going to impact increasing pay or whatnot. How much does that increase?
Since I'm not
retirement?
retired, I don't have a clue, and I couldn't even tell you within probably $10,000.
Well, typical systems, retirements and
what I
whatnot
make, because-
run. I mean, we've seen 40 to 60% or something. I'm just wondering if that's anywhere in the ballpark.
Judges participate in lasers. It's the same formula that you all are accustomed to in lasers.
Okay, in lasers.
It's a percentage based on the number of years of services. That's why you're unable to actually get a specific thing. So many years to vest, depending on when you retire, you get a percentage based upon your years of service. That's the way it works.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Cruz.
Did a little bit better, Stu?
Okay, well, that's it for today. Appreciate y'all for being here. Thank you very much.
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to meet with y'all, and I appreciate the questions and the banter back and forth. I respect the work that y'all have to do, and we'll leave it into your good hands.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
very
us.
much.
Thank y'all for coming. Thank you.